gatherings.
We've got to do everything that's right to protect the country, but the way things are going at the moment, we're very confident in the steps that we've taken. I'll be setting out a lot more tomorrow. I'll be giving you a full update on the plans for the autumn and the winter.
The UK will now be offering the first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to young people aged 12 to 15. Health officials say kids will primarily receive their vaccine in schools, with invitations for appointments set to begin next week. A judge in the largest county in Texas will present a resolution today opposing the state's ban on abortions after 6 weeks. Republican Governor Greg Abbott signed the restrictive law in May. It allows private citizens to bring civil suits against anyone who assists a pregnant woman seeking an abortion in violation of the law. Last week, Abbott addressed the lack of exceptions in cases of rape or incest.
Rape is a crime, and Texas will work tirelessly to make sure that we eliminate all rapists from the streets of Texas by aggressively going out and arresting them and prosecuting them and getting them off the streets. So goal number one in the state of Texas is to eliminate rape so that no woman, no person will be a victim of rape.
Abbott's comments stung many people at the time, but they're even more shocking in light of the fact that Texas has more than 5,000 untested rape kits sitting on shelves around the state. CNN's Randy Kay has our report.
That would be a beautiful thing to see, but it's not going to happen. It's not realistic.
Lavinia Masters isn't buying it. She has little hope Texas Governor Greg Abbott can deliver on his recent promise to eliminate all rapists from the streets of Texas. How can the governor of Texas eliminate all rapists from the street when the governor and the state hasn't even been able to eliminate the backlog of rape kits?
Exactly. That's a $1 question. When you say things like that, it's outlandish to say things in that manner.
House Bill 8 is now law.
When Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed into law the Lavinia Masters Act in 2019, Lavinia, a survivor of rape, was there. The act was designed to audit untested rape kits across the state and set strict testing requirements. The Texas Department of Public Safety tells CNN, as of August, there are still 5,298 untested rape kits. But we've learned that number doesn't include the untested rape kits from 231 law enforcement agencies who did not report their numbers to the state. So the number could be much higher, which means thousands of rapists could be on the run, possibly raping others. How frustrated are you that thousands of rape kits are still sitting unprocessed on the shelf?
I'm very frustrated.
Lavinia, who is a member of Governor Abbott's Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force, was raped at knife point back in 1985. She was just 13. Her own rape kit with her attacker's DNA sat untested on a shelf for more than 20 years. By the time her attacker was identified, the statute of limitations had run out, and the man was already in prison. He'd been caught after raping 2 other women while Lavinia's kit sat on the shelf.
We still have a lot of work to do. It's not an easy task. It's a heavy lift.
Texas State Representative Victoria Niave has been working alongside Lavinia for years to clear the rape kit backlog. At one point, she says, there were about 19,000 untested kits.
Each box is not just a box sitting on a shelf. It represents a survivor's story. It represents an individual, a family who has been impacted by this. It represents women who are waiting for justice. And so we know that there's still more work to do.
Niave says the state is making it a priority and has approved $50 million to help test these kits. But with thousands of rape kits still on the shelf, that leaves a lot of women wondering who raped them, and a lot of rapists on the street.
That's a big reason why many women do not report that they have been raped, because they don't think that their case is going to be prosecuted.
Beyond the backlog, the new Texas law banning abortions after 6 weeks, even in the case of rape and incest, infuriated Lavinia.
That's asinine. That makes absolutely no sense at all. That makes no sense at all.
Because you may not even know you're pregnant
exactly,
at 6 weeks.
Exactly. We've already felt we lost what's control. We've lost our power. And now you're continuing to strip us by saying, by 6 weeks, if you don't get rid of that baby, you have to keep it. No, sir, that's ludicrous.
Lavinia knows if she'd gotten pregnant and that law had been in place, she would have had to carry and deliver her rapist child at 13.
They don't know who he was. And that child wants to know their father. They don't know their background. They don't know their history. I don't know about their illnesses or anything. But I would be forced to carry that baby. That's not common. That's not even common sense.
Randy Kay, CNN, Dallas.
And we'll continue to shine a light on this. Just ahead, a promise of desperately needed aid for Afghanistan, but also a warning that the country will need much more than humanitarian help to fix the current crisis. They fled Afghanistan as the Taliban took control. Now tens of thousands more Afghan refugees will soon be headed to the US. More on that story when we return.
We've missed the globetrotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering the city's DNA.
I'm not being here.
Meeting people who will share its secrets.
Make it a fairy tale.
And making discoveries that wow.
Aye, aye, aye.
It's a world of wonder. Now go and see it. Saturday on CNN in association with Turkish Airlines.
On the next Living Golf, hitting the links the Icelandic way. Tee off under the midnight sun on courses like no other in the world. It's become a mecca for golfers visiting Iceland.
It's of course a very unique and beautiful country, and we're just crazy about golf.
Join me, Shane O'Donoghue, on this month's Living Golf.
Saturday on CNN in association with Gulf Saudi.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
This is CNN 10. My name is Carl Zeus. I'll be your explainer-in-chief.
Relevant stories, complex issues explained, all in 10 minutes. CNN 10, a virtual learning resource you can use at home. Stream at cnn.com/CNN10. Trends, tech, news, Marketplace Asia.
This month, from innovative trends to new technologies, meet the people transforming the way we work.
Marketplace Asia, Saturday on CNN.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
The UN Secretary General is warning that the people of Afghanistan are facing the collapse of their entire country all at once. Antonio Guterres delivered the assessment during a donor conference that raised more than $1 billion for Afghanistan. The World Food Programme estimates 14 million Afghans are on the brink of starvation. Guterres says food could run out by the end of this month, and an economic collapse would create a mass exodus, threatening the stability of the entire region.
If we want to protect the human rights of the people of Afghanistan, the best way is to move on with humanitarian aid and engage the Taliban and take profit of that humanitarian aid to push for those rights to be implemented. Let's have no illusion. We are not trying to transform Afghanistan into Sweden or Switzerland. But we know that there are a number of basic rights that is essential to implement, and they are in the center of our engagement with the Taliban.
And earlier I spoke with Baba Baloch, the global spokesman for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. He talked about whether the pledged funds will be enough to turn Afghanistan's crisis around.
We are reaching a point where Afghans are now really overstretched in terms of their coping mechanism. We are talking about 3.5 million Afghans that have been displaced inside their country, more than 630,000 during this year. This number includes 80% of women and children, and those needs are huge, and they are mounting day by day. So all the pledges now need to turn into real cash, and they need to materialize in terms of providing the humanitarian assistance. You heard the warnings, and we have been trying to highlight this again and again to the world, that stay engaged, stay focused inside Afghanistan. Don't leave Afghans or Afghanistan at this critical juncture.
And CNN's Awa Damon joins us now live from Istanbul. The situation is dire across Afghanistan. What is the latest on what Afghans are dealing with at this time?
It's absolutely heartbreaking, Rosemary. They're dealing with an inability to access their money, and that's if they had that much money or funds to begin with, keeping in mind that around 76% of the population before all of this, before the Taliban takeover of Kabul, was already living below the poverty line. They're dealing with hunger. They are dealing with an inability to access proper health care, basic medical care, essential services. When we talk about the economic collapse of Afghanistan, we're also talking about the collapse of certain infrastructures or certain processes, logistical processes that were in place to try to get humanitarian aid where it needs to go. Again, already an enormous challenge prior to the Taliban's takeover, and one that is going to prove to be even more difficult, getting that humanitarian aid where it needs to go. A number of international organizations are warning about the collapse of the health system there, one that was already struggling to begin with. There are warnings about malnutrition. There are warnings about women's health, girls' health. And so that's why it is really critical right now that a number of these aid organizations engage with the Taliban, and they are engaging with the Taliban to try to ensure that humanitarian aid does get to where it needs to be, to try to ensure safe passage and ability for their staff on the ground to be able to operate. But you have a number of organizations, including Doctors Without Borders, that are saying that the need is so great right now, and there is such a lack of staff and capabilities on the ground that, you know, they wish that they could just clone themselves. And this is where a big burden of responsibility does, to a certain degree, lie on the U.S. and its allies. After all, they were the ones who withdrew. There was no plan in place for the withdrawal, and there most certainly was no plan in place to ensure that these vital lifelines for humanitarian aid supplies continue to function in a manner that the population needs and that the population deserves. The great concern that a lot of these aid organizations and others are highlighting is that while Afghanistan is still currently in the spotlight, yes, there is a lot of attention, yes, there is money being pledged, but our attention span, unfortunately, tends to be very short. And so what happens when Afghanistan eventually does slide out of the spotlight? There have to be measures put into place to ensure, to put it very bluntly, that people don't end up unnecessarily dying because they don't have access to basic medicine or because they don't have access to enough to eat.
Yeah, it is such an important point. Alba Damon joining us live from Istanbul. Many thanks. Well, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is calling the evacuations from Kabul an extraordinary effort. During a virtual hearing with House lawmakers, he said they got almost all U.S. citizens and Afghans who wanted to leave out. Tens of thousands of Afghans who fled the country are now in the United States. CNN's Oren Lieberman has the details.
Ever since the first flight of evacuees landed at Dulles International Airport in late July, the number of Afghans coming into the United States has soared. The U.S. anticipates the arrival of more than 65,000 Afghan refugees by the end of the month. Already, the military has built what one official described as small cities on 8 bases. Those bases now house 53,000 at-risk Afghans. Fort Bliss in Texas was the first to grant media access to see the facilities. Here, there is housing for more than 10,000 Afghans. They'll get COVID vaccines, medical screening, beginning of a new life. At Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey, the Afghans have broken up their village into councils. The leaders of these councils meet with base officials on Afghan society within a U.S. military facility. Already, 2 babies were born on different bases, some of the first new Americans from the Afghan evacuation. Some Afghans who were far along in their visa application left the bases within days, but that number, one U.S. official said, was not large. Many may be here much longer, months even, as they work through a complex visa process. At Dulles Airport, officials discovered 3 confirmed cases of measles among at-risk Afghans. Another case was confirmed at Fort Pickett in Virginia, and a 5th at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin.
There are no 100% guarantees with any of this, but I am comfortable with the extreme vetting process that we were briefed on today. The multi-layer, the biometric, all the background checks.
The discovery of the highly contagious disease prompted the military to pause the flights of Afghan evacuees from Europe to the United States for at least 7 days.
We want the people who work on these bases and the families who live there to know how seriously we're taking it.
One Homeland Security official said this is likely one of the most important missions they'll ever work on, as the U.S. tries to draw a better future for tens of thousands of Afghan evacuees.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken was grilled about the security screening and the medical screening that will go into allowing the Afghans to enter the U.S. To speed along that screening, the Department of Homeland Security has added about 150 employees at U.S. bases to help in that screening process and some 400 employees overseas. But make no mistake, this is a process that will take time. There is no clear answer for how long the U.S. military will house these Afghan evacuees. They simply say, as long as is necessary. Oren Lieberman, CNN, in the Pentagon.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is in Moscow for talks with his Russian